Richards trying to scoot in there alone. It pinballs to the crease.
Let's get it.
Oh my God! Here we go, here we go.
You're listening to the Pod Street Blues Podcast with your hosts, Derek.
How you gonna get it, Bobby?
John.
Johnny, eat up, bud.
Matt Casey.
Unnecessary, but totally necessary.
And Hoagie.
What's not to love?
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another edition of Pod Street Prospects. I'm John, and I'm here with my good buddy Hoagie. Hoagie, how are you?
I'm doing great. How you doing, John?
Living the dream, man. Just a few more days of this summer vacation.
Just remember, nightmares are dreams too.
Yeah, no, I'm fully aware of that. But, yeah, I mean, summer's coming to an end. I guess for people in the regular working world, they're about done with summer, right?
Yeah, just about. I'm ready to get rid of this heat. It's disgusting.
I always felt like if I didn't have a job like teaching where I had summers off, I would hate the summer.
Yeah.
Not really a hot weather guy myself.
Definitely not.
But
not a fan.
we'll save the meteorology, I guess, for another show. But today we've got something fun that we're going to do on the show today. We're going to kind of steer away from what we've been doing, where we're just like previewing some of the prospects in the system. And we've decided to create a list. Hoagie and I have created our own ranking list talking about the five prospects under the most pressure this upcoming season. So, Hoagie, before we dive into these lists, right, what are some things that you considered when you were thinking about, like, what kind of pressure these prospects were under?
It was tough. I'll tell you that. Mainly guys that are kind of either new or that we're expecting to be on the roster or are kind of back and forth type of guys. Those are the types that I was kind of viewing as the guys under pressure. Because looking at these prospects, it's tough. It's tough. And we were texting. I wasn't even sure which prospects to consider. And because, there's guys that have spent time on the team. There's guys that haven't or have been all over the place.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I think one of the things that we kind of came to the conclusion of was, like, anybody who isn't an established NHLer yet. I mean, and even like somebody might want to say Cam York is an established NHLer. But no, he's not. He's going to make this team. But look at who he's going up against.
Right.
It could be different if you are talking about a much more talented roster.
Exactly.
I tried to split it up into three separate categories. I had like a list of like 7 or 8 guys that I knew I wanted to be a part of like consideration. And then I looked at it from what kind of pressure is the organization putting on them? What kind of pressure is the fan base putting on them? And what kind of pressure are they putting on themselves? And I tried to consider those 3 aspects when kind of creating my list.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's kind of how I viewed it too. But I took it more from like management and a fan base perspective instead of themselves.
Right. Well, you'd like to think that they're always putting pressure on themselves.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. But all right. Well, I think we should just get right into it. So, Hoagie, who is your 5th guy, number 5?
My 5th is someone we talked about last week with Cutter Gauthier.
All right.
I just think there's going to be a lot of pressure with him and a lot of people wanting him to be on this roster as soon as possible because he gives us that firepower. And he's kind of fresh in our minds coming off the draft.
Okay.
That I just took it that way, and I think management might kind of try to be pushing on him to sign that contract come the spring when NCAA wraps up. And that's how I was viewing him.
That's interesting because he didn't make my list at all.
Okay.
Nobody from this current draft did. a lot of the guys that are on my list are more elder statesmen in the prospect world. But I mean, I totally understand where you're coming from. And I almost wanted to put him as like under consideration because I totally agree with you. I mean, he's our highest draft pick since Nolan Patrick. And we all know how that turned out.
Exactly.
But I mean, personally, I kind of steered away from him just because I do think that this is kind of like a let's see year for everybody involved.
Right.
And I almost feel like the pressure turns up after this college season. You know, the pressure to sign, the pressure to be on the Flyers.
Yeah.
But I totally see where you're coming from. For me, my number 5 was somebody who I think if he could stay healthy, or actually if he signed a contract, might be a little bit higher. But Wade Allison for me was number 5. And again, the reason that I think he's number 5 on my list is because he's technically not signed yet. There's always a chance he doesn't sign. I think he will, but it's pretty obvious with Wade Allison. I think if you talk to anybody who follows this team closely, when healthy, he is a roster piece and a pretty important roster piece. The problem with him is that he can't stay healthy. And when he signs his new contract, that's where the pressure is going to lie. Is we know what you can do on the ice, but can you maintain health?
Right.
And it really turns into a make or break situation with him because if he gets hurt again for a significant amount of time, you really have to start to think that his career, you know, as an NHL player is really close to done.
Yeah. I have him on my list.
Okay.
And I mean, do you want me to say where or do you want me to hold off?
I
have him at number 2 for me.
Wow.
Because there's a lot of pressure on him to sign that contract, to stay healthy, and to make an impact on the roster. The past couple of seasons, he's like right on the cusp of being slotted into the lineup. And what have you, rookie games, something stupid, he gets hurt. And I just think there's a lot of pressure on him to produce, to stay healthy, to stay in the lineup, and to just more importantly, just sign that contract.
But my question for you, and this was something that I went back and forth with, is do you think that maybe some of that pressure has been alleviated from the organization as far as expectations, where it's like, we're willing to give this guy a contract because we know if he can stay healthy, we have a great player, but the chances of him actually doing so are quite slim. You know, like
That's tough, man.
I just feel like so if they're halfway intelligent, they have to go, okay, we cannot bank on this guy actually being there for us, but we'd be foolish to not at least give it one more shot.
Right. Yeah, I'm interested to see what this contract looks like. I'm sure it's not going to be crazy term.
It's crazy that there is even some sort of dispute.
Right. It probably comes down to money at that point. It's got to be, right?
I would think he wants 2 years. He wants some sort of security.
Yeah, exactly. And we're probably thinking 1 year.
Right.
Kind of like
Morgan Frost type deal.
Yeah. Prove to us that you're healthy and that you keep rolling and can stay in the lineup.
Right.
So.
All right. So we've got our number 5s. For you is Gauthier. For me it was Allison. You have Allison at 2.
Yep.
Spoiler alert. All right. So what about number 4 for you, buddy?
Number 4, I went to the blue paint with Felix Sandstrom.
All right.
Do you have him at all?
I do. Give me your explanation, then I'll tell you where I have him.
So with Sandstrom, it's a crazy story. Everybody had Fedotov slated in, who's under pressure in his own way right now. But I think there's a lot of pressure on him either being the backup or the starter. And if he's the starter in Lehigh Valley, excuse me. I think if he's the starter in Lehigh Valley and he starts doing really well, I think we're going to see him up in the NHL lineup. And there's going to be pressure on him to help Carter Hart substantially because I think we're going to see a lot of backup goaltender games with the amount of back-to-backs. And we know Carter Hart can't really take the workload by himself. So that's where the pressure is going to be on him. And I think it's going to be mainly him putting the pressure on himself.
I have him at 2.
Really?
I do. and I kind of went back and forth. I'm going to say this a lot. I went back and forth with this, but to me, you're looking at a guy who he played what, 2 games last year?
Something like that.
Very
Yeah.
little NHL experience. Like you mentioned, Fedotov was kind of the favorite to be the backup, but all of a sudden, it's like, Sandstrom, you're either going to be a quality backup or we're screwed.
Yeah, pretty much.
And the chances are that Carter Hart's going to go down for a little bit. So I really do think that the organization has put him in a position where it's like he needs to be what he quite isn't ready to be yet.
Yep.
And that just ramps up the pressure. And if Carter Hart has a down year, everyone is going to be looking at Sandstrom.
Yeah, to take over the reins and kind of help us get
Yep.
through it.
You know, I mean, and hopefully that doesn't happen. I mean, well, obviously we're all Flyer fans. We hope that Carter Hart is able to, you know, hold down the fort. But if not, everyone is going to look to Sandstrom. So I just think with goalies being on an island the way that they are, any sort of pressure just gets ramped up a little bit more. So I felt like number 2 might seem a little dramatic, but I just felt like because of the importance of the position and the lack of depth that we have,
Right.
that's where it needed to be.
No, it's fair. I just don't think it's that important.
What do you mean?
I mean, I think Carter Hart's our starter, but I mean, Chuck obviously isn't too confident in Sandstrom to be our backup. I think the signing of Grosnick is going to be let's try him out first, and then we'll go to Sandstrom.
See, that's where you and me disagree here. I really think that if that was the route that they were going, they would sign somebody else other than, and it's Grosnick is how it's not Grosnick.
I don't know, man.
I like Grosnick. But you know, like, to me, that's when you bring in a guy like
Martin Jones.
Martin Jones, you know?
Right.
It in my mind, it was okay. Grosnick can play the AHL, right? I mean, I just feel like in Fletcher's mind, whether he was thinking this through or not, it was, we're going to give Sandstrom the opportunity. And I truly do think that he's the one that starts on the NHL roster. And I just think that that's a crazy amount of pressure for a young kid that really hasn't had any NHL experience.
I mean, that's how it was with Carter Hart when we brought him up in the middle of the season.
For sure.
Toss him to the Wolves. It's time to roll.
Right. I mean, but you might even say that the same pressure is put on Grosnick if he's put in that position. Because they could just both be out of their league.
Yeah.
You know?
I don't it's a tricky spot.
Right.
I mean, I'm glad we didn't go the veteran route because it proved time and time again that it didn't work.
Right.
Carter Hart was always looking over his shoulder because he thought he'd get pulled and the veteran would get slated. So I think this is Carter Hart's time to shine, and he knows either of those two are not going to be taking his crease.
Yeah, but they're still going to have to play at least like 25 games.
Yeah, but they're not taking majority of the games, is what I'm saying.
Yeah. No, I hear you.
Yeah.
You know, but anyway, let's move on. Number 3. Who do you got, my friend?
Number 3, Cam York, Captain USA.
Ooh. I don't have him on my list at all.
Really?
Yep.
I have him mainly because it's time to take the training wheels off.
Okay.
Let's let him fly. I think having him with Braun is going to let him groom into that NHL defenseman that we've waited to watch this kid do. And I think with the training wheels off and letting him roll and giving him more expendable ice time on power play, what have you, I think we're really going to watch this kid bloom this year. So I think he's going to have a little bit of pressure to kind of be more than the third pair defenseman on himself.
Okay.
I think coaches are not going to want to. I think management might want him pushed into a bigger role, but I think Tortorella is going to be like, he's still a kid. We don't really know what he has quite yet. Let's keep the training wheels on. It's the teetering training wheels. Like
Sure.
But I think at one point we're just gonna let them fly.
It's interesting because I almost feel like Cam York is in the perfect position where there is very little pressure from anybody else but himself.
Right.
He's making this roster, right? There's nobody competing for his spot.
It's true.
At the same time, our top 4 is pretty much set unless he proves otherwise. So I just think that his foundation is way too stable to apply that much pressure to, where it's like and I think I said this on a show, one of our Pod Street Bully shows, where I think like the only direction he can move is up.
Right.
He's not getting sent down. Nobody's replacing him on that third pairing. But there is a situation where if he plays well enough, they might feel comfortable with dealing a guy like Sanheim at the deadline.
Right.
So I just feel like from an organizational standpoint, that pressure really isn't there, which I think will benefit Cam York because it's really just all he's putting on himself.
Makes sense. Yeah, I don't know. I just think there's a little bit more there because I think he's going to want to prove more in training camp that he's better than the third pair.
Right.
And I even wrote down, I think he's going to kind of teeter between middle pair and bottom pair.
Okay.
Depending on how the middle pair is playing out and whatnot. I think I've said that. I think Risto might be doing the same thing with York, kind of playing ping pong.
I think in a perfect world, Cam York plays up to that second pair and you can trade a guy like Sanheim.
Right. Because you've got Ristolainen locked in, baby.
Right. They're not going anywhere.
Yep.
So for me, this one was hard, but my third was Morgan Frost. And
he's my honorable mention.
He's not even on the list.
He's my honorable mention. You know why.
Why?
Because I'm tired of talking about the kid.
I thought that he was like the obvious one. But for me, and maybe you can kind of agree with me on this then, like, I just feel like there's very little expectation in the organization at this point.
Right.
Where I think that the most pressure is the fan base because it's like him or bust in so many different places. And he was a prospect that so many were excited about for a long time.
Right.
But I just think that when it comes to like what Chuck Fletcher and company are thinking, I really do think that there's some sort of mindset out there that's like, most likely this just isn't going to work out, but we're not going to be very good this year anyway. We might as well give it one other shot.
Yeah.
But aside from the fact that like you just didn't want to talk about him because now here we are talking about him.
Right.
How did he not crack your top 5?
You made the comment of, they haven't played an 82 game slate, what have you, in the NHL. He's got 77 games played. He's right there. Like,
okay.
I don't consider him a prospect anymore. And we've had this discussion at the same rate.
Right.
He should be in the lineup. He's been dealt a pretty crappy hand between COVID, injury, and what was what was that squad? The
taxi squad?
The taxi squad. He was kind of floating in between there. AV, who knows what AV thought of the kid? Right. Like, he's been dealt a crappy hand. I think he's kind of shown what he can do and what he can't do.
Right.
And I'm sure there's pressure there, but for me as a fan, I'm not putting any pressure on it.
You know what I just realized, Hoagie?
What's that?
I didn't do my number 4.
Yeah, I just realized it too in the middle of Frost.
Did you do you've done 5, 4, and 3, right?
Yeah, I did.
So recap it. Who was your 5, 4, 3?
5, Cutter Gauthier, 4, Felix Sandstrom, and 3, Cam York.
Got it. So I started talking about Sandstrom and then jumped right to 3 because he was my 2. So we're going to jump back a minute.
We're done with Frost.
Yeah. My number 4, Jay O'Brien.
Really?
Yeah. I think Jay O'Brien, for the obvious reason that he was a first round pick. And just the fact that, like, this guy, we're talking about year 5, he's yet to get an entry level deal. I just think of all of the not signed prospects, he's going to be the one that's watched. And I just think that there's part of me who thinks that, like, Chuck Fletcher and company aren't even thinking of this guy,
Right. He's
which made me kind
of
of
the cards.
teeter back and forth. But I just think when you're thinking about a first round pick, right, you have to have that level of expectation. And I also think as a fan, for me, right, like, I'm not completely out on the idea of him joining this team. I think that if he signs, like, he could be a valuable weapon.
Yeah, I think so too. Isn't there a stigma with Jay O'Brien that if he doesn't sign, we're awarded a second round pick equal to where they were selected in the first round?
Maybe.
I've heard that. I've seen some rumblings on Twitter about it. Well, where was he drafted again?
19th overall?
19. Toss that in the second round. In this draft.
Yeah.
It's a deep draft. I wouldn't mind taking that pick.
Yeah, I guess just, like, for him, right, to be a first round pick and not get signed.
Right.
You're putting a lot of pressure on yourself to do what you can.
Yeah. I agree. But I don't know. Like you said, Hextall reached for that one. And
Yeah.
I think Chuck is kind of making that known on his part that it was a reach and that he doesn't really think he's worth it at this time.
Right.
So,
all right. So I had Allison at 5, O'Brien at 4, Frost at 3, and then I had Sandstrom at 2. Who was your 2?
we already talked about him, Wade Allison.
Wade Allison. All right.
So we're having the 1.
I would assume that we have the same guy, because if you don't have this guy on your list, I don't know. I might have to find somebody new to talk about prospects with.
I'll go on Owen Tippett.
Me too.
Okay. I got a little scared there. Owen Tippett is interesting because he's not really our prospect.
Sure.
He was the Panthers prospect, but I think there's a big shine on the kid for him to succeed. He's kind of the Panthers-esque Morgan Frost of the Flyers.
Yep.
I think we had a small sample size towards the end of the season of what he can do. And I think he's the type of player that is going to work hard for what he wants, because I think he wants to make this roster and wants to prove himself, mainly because he was the staple of the Claude Giroux trade.
Yep.
So there's a lot of pressure from him on himself, from himself. A lot of pressure from the fan base because of Claude Giroux and Chuck pretty much saying, "You were my guy. Let's make this work."
Right. No, I totally agree with you. I mean, the organization needs him to work out. Mm-hmm. He is the key piece to the Giroux trade that a lot of people were really unhappy with. I mean, you can take away that it was the only place you wanted to go, right? You looked at that deal and you're like, what? So from an organizational standpoint, there's a crazy amount of pressure that he works out. I think from a fan standpoint, I do think it's a little less because we're a little more unfamiliar with him.
Right.
Where, what we saw of him, I look at it and go, okay, I see his skill translating a lot more than I do Morgan Frost.
Yeah. Yeah. He's got insane numbers.
Yeah.
In juniors, what have you, coming up the ranks.
Right.
Crazy numbers.
I mean, and the shots there, he just wasn't connecting.
And that's like one thing that he wants to work on too.
Right.
Was developing more of the shot.
Right.
But it's there.
Right. And I think that the one thing that stood out the most to me compared to the rest of these guys is the contract. If you look at the rest of them, and I know Wade Allison, you can't really tell, but none of them are over $1 million.
Right. He's what, 1.5?
I think he's 1.5 for the next 2 years.
Yeah.
So it shows a level of faith in him that the Flyers don't have in the rest of the guys in this category. I mean, Cam York might be. Is Cam York still on his entry level deal? What's the deal with him?
I think he's ELC. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. See,
He's only 2 years. He's only been in 2 years or so, right?
right. I mean, he's a very different beast, just because like
He's slated.
right, and we know that the only way he's going to go is up. I think with a lot of these other guys, and Owen Tippett falls into that category. Is we just don't know.
Right. Yeah. I mean, Owen Tippett. We have him slated in the lineup, right? Like, he can't go anywhere else.
I mean, I don't know how this guy doesn't contend for the second line.
Right.
At this point.
With the right line mates, absolutely. Right. He definitely contends for it. I don't think he'll be there.
Right.
Because of what we have in the top 6 of dismal.
Okay. I was going to say, you don't think that they have the right people to put with him? Because
I just think the wrong people will be in the top 6.
Okay. But instead of him? Or just like if you were
instead of him, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, to me, right? Like you look at that left. He plays left wing, I think, right? Yeah.
Right wing, left wing. It has it.
Okay, great. So you can put him on the left wing. Like that second line left wing with Farabee gone.
Yeah, need something there.
Right. To me, it just makes the most sense.
So what you have him? What him?
At one.
Hayes and Konechny?
Oh yeah. Yeah, him, Hayes. No, him. I like him, Hayes, and Atkinson. Ooh, couldn't think of his name.
He's one that gets lost in the full.
Yeah, jeez. But all right, so pretty different lists.
Yeah, thank God we hit on the one.
Well, I just think that's the great thing about prospects is you can interpret the idea of pressure differently. I mean, I'm sure you could have kind of run through every player and come up with reasons why they could have been on the list. Yeah. Now, I know that you mentioned an honorable mention.
Yep.
Was there anybody else that you were really considering?
Not really, to be honest.
No.
I was having a hard time. I didn't want to reach too far down the pipeline of prospects. Because I could have just went completely off the page with some of them.
Sure.
And I was like, that's why I texted you. I was like, where are we ranging? Because it was tough for me.
Yeah, I had 2 more that I considered.
You want to talk about them?
Well, I mean, I'll at least mention their names.
Sure.
Tanner Lashinsky. I just feel like he's like Wade Allison light, right?
Right.
He doesn't quite come with the pedigree. He doesn't have, the offensive promise. But he is somebody where it's like if he was healthy, could be in this lineup. So I think just like Allison, you have to prove it. He's got 2 years to do so.
Yep.
And then one that I feel like I just had to at least think about for a minute was Zamula, because he was a prized child at one point.
Yep.
But now he's kind of just lost in the depth chart, especially on that left side.
Yeah. Zamula, I just kind of read over his name.
Right.
He's one of those guys that we've talked about until the cows came home, and I just don't think he has any pressure on him anymore because we just know what he is.
Right. I mean, and I think the organization really thinks that way. Okay, we inherited this undrafted
free agent,
and he's not doing enough. I do think that there's still a group of fans that are hopeful, but I think it's a lot smaller than it's ever been.
Yeah, I think so too. That's just, who knows with the kid anymore.
Yeah, but all right, man. Well, that was fun.
Yeah, I enjoyed that one.
All right, cool. Well, anything else you want to say? Anything we're missing?
I feel like Derek would get mad at us if we didn't mention what's his name? Forster.
Tyson Forster. All right, so yeah, that's kind of interesting.
Derek would get very mad at us.
Why didn't he make our list?
The injury from last year, maybe?
Yeah.
I I think he's going to be slotted in on that on the AHL roster until he proves he's ready to go.
Right. I feel like similar to what Cutter Gauthier, he's somebody where I'm not quite ready to put in that like high pressure,
Right.
Category, because it's like he's on track and he's had a few bumps in the road.
And he's still kind of progressing nicely.
Right. And if we run into a situation where he can't crack the NHL roster at all this year, he just kind of plateaus in the AHL this year, then the pressure's on.
Yep, for next season. Yeah,
But
absolutely.
For right now, it's like, okay, this is where you are. You just take it and run with it and see what you can do.
Take it to the next level.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he wasn't even I didn't even think about him at all.
I thought about him for a hot second just mainly because the World Juniors just ended and he was a pretty important piece to that roster.
Right.
Like he should have been. And he could be a pretty important piece to our roster in the future.
And I do think that there are some names that are talked about a lot that it doesn't fall into the same category as pressure. Like Elliot Denoyer talked about way too much.
Yep.
But
Sade Wisdom, too much.
but even like Emile Andre,
Yep.
What kind of pressure is this guy really under? Yes, we're talking about him a lot right now, but I can guarantee you come December, we're not talking about him.
Fizzles out.
Yeah. So I do think that like those highly talked about prospects aren't necessarily the ones that, when you really try to put in the microscope, that they're there.
Right. Yeah, no, I completely agree. It could be even the fact that we've talked about them over the past couple of weeks on this show. But they're, like we said, they're not trying to crack it. They're not trying to slide into the lineup. They're not teetering between AHL and NHL. They're just kind of progressing and what have you.
Right. And it's like, again, if they don't progress at the level that many of us would like, it's like, well, that's what you get with prospects sometime. But it's like, if they do take that jump, we're like, oh, wow, pleasant surprise.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. Most of these guys on this list, it's not that case.
Not at all.
Frost screws up in the first 10 games. It's like, well, no trade value. What are we going to do with this guy? But all right. Well, that's it for us tonight, I think, there, Hoagie.
Yeah. Yeah. Short and sweet.
Yep.
Still plenty of good content.
All right. And you can find Hoagie at Pod Street Hoags. You can find me at Pod Street Go. Am I Pod Street Go? Yeah. All right. You can find this podcast on all your various podcast listening receptacles. I don't need to list them. Just a quick shout out to our affiliates. We've got Flyers High and Wide and our buddies over at 5 Minute Major. And that's about all I got to say, Hoags. What about you?
Bye now.